Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. During the session, you'll have a chance to ask questions, and if you can use the chat box at the bottom of the screen, we'll be able to see your questions, and then hopefully Gemma will be able to answer those, and certainly at the end there'll be time for questions and for us to address any particular topics that you've got and get those answered for you. So this session is being recorded, so if you haven't been able to make it today, then we can send you a recording of it. So introductions first. My name's Tim Andow. I'm the Director Principal here at Andow Ellis, Chartered Certified Accountants, and we're based in Westbury-on-Trim in Bristol. We're looking at HR today, and it's common for most businesses with employees to operate a payroll scheme, either processing the payroll themselves or to outsource it to their accountant or bookkeeper. However, many of those businesses, and particularly the smaller businesses, don't consider the HR side. And today I'm joined by Gemma Bryan of Jigsaw HR Solutions, who will guide us through what we need to know and also look specifically at some aspects relevant at this current time. Gemma, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. So welcome to everyone, and I'll be taking you through the wonderful world of HR. Very exciting. So, there we go. So a little bit about me before we start. I've got over 15 years experience in HR. I'm what's known as chartered through the membership governing body of HR with an HR Masters from the University of Northampton. And my background is very, very varied. I've covered manufacturing, hospitality, professional services, finance, and many others. So I've worked for Hilton Hotels, I've worked for Santander Bank, I've worked for a number of big manufacturing plants, and lots of other areas as well. So, HR. So what do we do? There's a number of key areas that we cover. The most well-known, I would say, is employment law, and this is making sure a business stays within the law regards to employment. So that can be anything from having the correct disciplinary process to making redundancies to employing people and everything else in between. Another area we cover is performance and absence management, and this is when we work with a company to help those more troublesome employees with any performance issues or managing their absence levels, looking for patterns. So if they're off every Monday or Friday, or there's particular times towards payday or anything like that, we can look at that and help with those, with that information. The next area is employee engagement. And that is basically helping companies to engage with their employees. So making sure they've got low levels of staff turnover, low levels of absence, and the staff are basically fully focused and engaged within the company. The next area is strategy and planning, which links into the other topics really. So what we do is look at where business is and where it needs to get to, and we plan accordingly for that business, initially for the first 6 months, and then we go to a year and from there. And that could be a number of different areas, which are laid out in this. Next one is training, which for me is quite crucial for managers to make sure they have the right training from an HR perspective. So whether that is handling difficult conversations, whether that is appraisal training, whatever that is, we can, as HR, can look at covering that and helping managers to understand the ins and outs. And the last two areas, which I'll cover in more detail, are a contract of employment and policies. So the type of clients and contracts that an HR consultant like myself would typically deal with are small companies, so under around 70 employees. And just to make a quick note, directors are treated the same as employees with regards to rights and that. They have additional ones, but their overall rights are employee rights as well. And I look at any sector, whether that is restaurants, accountants, composting, salon, insurance broker, car garage and manufacturing. And those are all clients I have currently on my books. So what is required by law HR-wise? So the very first thing, and this has changed recently, is an employment contract, and that needs to be issued by the first day of employment. You no longer get a month, you have to do that by first day of employment. The next area is keeping employee files. So you need to make sure you have somewhere that stores all the information you have about your employees. And that brings me on to my Breathe HR system, which is a lovely system for storing documents, for holding information, for holiday booking, sickness monitoring, and it basically holds everything in the same place. And it's cloud-based as well, so anyone can work on it, and you don't have to be in a certain place. As long as you've got internet connection, you can go onto it and look at it. And it saves time on admin, it saves on papers, and it makes sure everything is in one place, which is really nice. The next area is adherence to the Working Time Directive. Now, you can have employees opting out of this, and that is always something I would put in a contract of employment to make sure they are aware of that, but you need to adhere to certain areas of that. Next is a pension scheme. So you need to make sure you have a pension scheme set up or able to set up, and that would be something the lovely Tim could help you with. And the next is statutory payments. So statutory sick pay, maternity pay, paternity pay, annual leave, national living wage, etc. And I'm going to cover that in a bit more detail a bit later. So as I said, yeah, statutory payments. So there's a number of things that you need to stick to as a business. So you need to make sure that you're paying your employees correctly. The current national minimum wage for over 25s is £8.72. Now that is lower for younger staff. The details I can provide if you need to. The next one is making sure you give your staff a minimum of 28 days annual leave entitlement. That includes bank holidays, and that is for a full-time member of staff. If you have a part-time member of staff, you prorata accordingly, just as you would their salary. The key there is 8 days bank holiday and 20 days annual leave, but you can roll it together and do 28 days. So the next is statutory sick payments. So if the employee is off sick and they meet the requirements necessary, you will have to pay them a minimum of £95.85 currently a week, SSP, so if they're off sick. And the next statutory payment is the stuff you can claim back from the government, basically. So maternity pay, paternity pay, adoption pay, shared parental leave, and a new one out, which is parental bereavement leave. And those you can claim a certain amount back from the government, but you have to be seeing to pay those if you have someone that meets the criteria and guidelines for that. So what goes into an employee contract, and what must you have in your contract? Now, this does look like a lot of stuff, but some of it is quite basic. So there's a number of areas that you need to have in a contract to make it legal. First one being the employer's name and the employee's name, a job title or a description of work, and their start date. You also need to include how much an employee is paid and how often they'll be paid, and the hours and days of work, and if they vary. Also, if there's any overtime or any bank holidays or Sundays they're required to work. The next is their holiday entitlement, so linking back, minimum of 28 days, and whether that is 20 days plus bank holiday or 28 including bank holiday. And you need to make that clear in the contract as well. The next one is where an employee will be working and whether they may have to relocate. So we can look at the clause in the contract of they must be able to work within a 10-mile radius or whatever that is, to make sure that is covered for the employer. The next area is if an employee works in different places. So as I said, if there is certain areas they're working, whether they have a fixed place of work, whether they have a number of different areas, whatever it is, we need to make sure that's in the contract as well. How long a job is meant to last. So if it's not a permanent contract, if there is a fixed term for it, making sure that end date is on there very clearly. The next is probation period, and that's something new that's been brought in since April this year. And probation periods typically are either 3 or 6 months, and you need to state what the conditions are. So when you pass it, you'll be notified in writing, etc., etc. Any other benefits that are offered, so whether that is childcare vouchers, free lunches, whether that is discounts on certain schemes, whatever that is, that also needs to be in the contract now. And the other one that is a new thing is what training is needed to have for that job, so the obligatory training, and whether it's paid or not by the employer. Now, I've made a note here. If there is a change, do you issue a new contract? And it basically depends on what you are changing. If it is just a job title change or salary, then potentially you wouldn't need a full contract. You would just need an amendment letter to the contract. But if there's more things you're changing, or there's a big chunk that changes, you would need to issue a new contract. There's also policies that we'll be looking at as well. And these fall into different areas. And what I've done is taken a sample here of what are good to have and best practice. So from this list, bullying, harassment, and discrimination is obviously a very in-depth topic. And if you don't deal with those areas correctly, potentially you could be looking at being taken to tribunal and stuff like that. Not to scare you, but let's make sure we have those kind of policies in place. Remote working is a really key one at the moment, especially with COVID going on. We need to make sure that if there's a policy in place to ensure remote working is done accurately and safely. A number of other ones, so drug and alcohol, making sure policy in place if there are issues around that. And different types of leave, so whether that is sickness, annual leave, maternity, paternity, jury leave, bereavement, all of those kind of things would be looked at in a policy as well. And grievance, performance, and disciplinary, they all kind of link together, but those are things that you really need to have a grievance policy and disciplinary policy to make sure you're following the guidelines and at least the ACAS code of practice. And the last one is internet, email, and social media. Now, social media these days is everywhere, and we need to make sure that our employees are using social media in a responsible way. And if they're not, and you have a correct policy in place, potentially you could look at disciplinary action if it gets out of control. Are there any questions at this stage before I go on to the COVID part?
There's no messages, there's no questions come up in the chat box, Gemma, okay?
Perfect, thanks, Tim. Okay, so surviving COVID, my top 5 HR tips. So firstly, and most importantly, make sure you are communicating with your staff. At the moment, it is a very, very difficult time for everyone. There's uncertainty everywhere. There are lots of anxious people, lots of worried people. So just making sure you're communicating with your staff as to what you're looking to put in place, how you're going to support them, how they can support the company, and any areas, and anything else that you can look at with them. Number 2 is being open to new ways of working and making sure you're flexible. So whether that is working from home, whether that is working at different sites, whether that is splitting up the office so you're adhering to COVID regulations, whatever that is, you need to make sure you're being flexible in order to get the most out of your employees and the most out of your business. The next one, which I can help you with, is keeping up to date with government's ever-changing guidelines. And as Tim said at the beginning, there has been more changing to guidelines for the next lockdown. It can get very confusing, and I am sending out updates every time I can. Government likes to spring things on us on a Friday or a Sunday, which is very, very exciting. But as soon as I have the information, I am happy to pass that on. So if there's something you want to be involved in, then please let me know and I can add you to my list. So the next one is listening to staff, and just making sure you are saying that you are there for them. And on top of that, they need to be there for you. People are going to be anxious and worried, and they may just need someone to chat to. And if that's all it is, then please be that listening board and just make sure that everyone feels like they are being treated in a way that is fair and they're listened to. And the last one is work with the experts. So whether it's myself in HR, whether it is a health and safety expert, whether it is an accountant, we are there to guide you through this. You are not alone. So let us help you. And there's been, as I said, another update for COVID. So the government have announced the return of furlough. And this will start, well, it's already started for November, and it is back up to 80%. So all the employers have to put in is the tax and NI, which is really, really good news. Lockdown is going to affect people, the next lockdown is going to affect people in lots of different ways, but hopefully this can help a number of businesses to continue. So, how do I, as an HR consultant, or actually let's pause there. Are there any questions that have come in?
Gemma, there is a question from someone about not to do with COVID, but to do with contracts. Do you want to take that now or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So someone has asked, at what point do subcontractors who work consistently need a contract?
Oh, that's interesting. So subcontractors are different. And as long as you are adhering to IR35 regulations and they are not an employee, they will need not a contract of employment, but a contract between businesses to make sure the work is being subcontracted effectively. What I can talk through is if someone's unsure as to whether they are a subcontractor or an employee, I'm happy to work that through with anybody to make sure they are adhering to the correct guidelines.
Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, so from an accountancy point of view, a subcontractor and an employee are two different things. And a subcontractor is someone that you get to do stuff for you, but they're their own business. It's only when they become an employee then HR kind of gets involved. So thank you for that question. There are no other questions at this point. So Gemma, would you like to carry on?
Perfect. Okay. So how do I, as an HR consultant, work with you in your business? So what would I initially do would be to come into a business, more often than not these days virtually, so through Zoom, etc. Or I can be on site, obviously not during lockdown, but potentially afterwards. And I would go through all the information you have. So I would see what if you have a contract of employment, any policies, and what you are generally doing. And then from there, we can see where that business is and where it needs to get to. With that, we could look at ongoing support. So I would be on the other end of the phone or email, and any questions you have HR related, I would be supporting you with, and also support you with the processes. So if there is a disciplinary that needs to take place, if potentially you need to make redundancies, if there is a TP that needs to happen, anything like that can be looked at with ongoing support. From the HR health check, we would look at contracts and policies, what's in place, and potentially what needs to be reviewed and updated to get that in line with employment law. There have been changes recently, and potentially most contracts may just need some bits added to comply with the law. And the next one would be looking at the breathe system that I mentioned before. And that setup, I would take you through, and I'd support you as an administrator for that package, as little or as much as you wanted. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Gemma. Yeah, we've got a question. Oh, where's it gone? Yeah, we've got a question that started. It will. I'm sure it will come to its full question in a minute. Gemma, that's been really useful so far. Thank you for that. The Breathe system is a really nice system, and Gemma has updated my contracts, reviewed my policies, and implemented Breathe for me, so I can vouch for the level of service and the quality of the systems there. The one thing that I found was that the service is personal to me, and it's also particularly tailored to my specific needs. So that has been really good, and that's the benefit of working with an HR consultant. The policies that have, sorry, the question that's come up. So the first question is, can you confirm if an health and safety policy is required?
Absolutely, although as an HR consultant, I wouldn't deal with health and safety. That would be somebody else. So absolutely, health and safety is really important and needs to be adhered to completely, but it's not something that I would deal with.
Okay, thank you. And then we've had another question. At an interview, can you ask someone if they smoke, because the owner may be asthmatic and it could trigger their asthma? So is that something you can ask at interview?
Potentially, but you're not allowed to smoke indoors now anyway. So they would have to be off the premises, and you can put a policy in place to say that, to say they need to be off the premises a certain distance in order to have a cigarette. So I wouldn't potentially be asking that at interview, but I'd be having that at the back of my head that if you do have a smoker, have a smoking policy and adhere to that.
Okay, so even if I found that if people smoke, the smell lingers on their clothes. So even if that would cause an issue in your environment, you still need to just say you've got to smoke 20 meters away from the edge of the premises or something.
I think if it gets to the point where it's causing an issue within the business, even if that person is smoking outside, that would be a conversation to have. It's very difficult, and it's not something that is discriminatory to say you can't smoke. That's absolutely fine. That is within legislation. That's not a problem. So if it is at the point where it is that bad, if someone's asthma is that bad that it is triggered even by people that smoked outside and coming in, then absolutely you can stop people from smoking at work.
Okay. And another question, what is the position with zero hours contracts when you're a micro business?
Absolutely fine to have 0 hours contracts as long as they are true 0 hours, which basically means that there's not a set pattern of working, so it's sporadic. So it's like 10 hours one week, 4 hours the next, and it's not any set pattern. 0 hours contracts are absolutely fine to have.
Okay, and that applies that if they were only working on a Friday, but 2 hours one Friday, 6 hours another Friday, because it's every Friday, that would constitute a pattern?
No, that's absolutely fine. As long as it's different times, that's absolutely fine. As long as you're not saying you need to work every Friday between 2 and 4. That would be a set pattern. As long as there is variation and you can demonstrate that variation, then you're absolutely fine.
Okay. And then with the actual contract itself, is it possible to draw up a kind of standard contract and then for each different employee just change the name, hours, salary on it, basically?
Absolutely, as long as it's following the same structure. So whether it's a permanent contract or a fixed term or 0 hours, as long as it follows that pattern. So you haven't got a permanent contract and then you employ somebody on 0 hours, you'd need different contracts for that. But as long as they're the same pattern, then that's absolutely fine. You can adjust accordingly. Okay,
thank you. Are there? Oh, hang on. I think there's another question. No, that's the same question. Okay, are there any other questions? Nothing's cropping up at the moment.
Okay.
think we've answered everything that's come through. Okay. Well, unless anything crops up whilst I'm speaking, thank you, Gemma. That's been really useful, really informative. No more questions? Last chance? No, right. I'm bringing the hammer down now. That's the end of today's session. Thank you very much for everyone that joined us. Hope you found that useful. As I said at the start, we'll send a recording if you'd like it afterwards, and for those that weren't able to make it. If you've got any further queries, feel free to get in contact. Gemma, did you put your contact details up, or?
I did not. Let me pop them in the chat.
Okay. So if you've got any direct queries to get in contact with Gemma, in the chat there's her details there. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Gemma, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.